Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. This is the election year in the United States, and this is a very important election, not just for United States, but also for the world. For United States, because the way Trump administration has been dealing with different challenges back in US has been a tough job and interesting as well. There have been different challenges for the Trump administration. Black Lives Matter, first of all, the way African Americans have been targeted by the police, American police, and we saw the backlash by the people. That was something interesting to observe in the domestic American politics. At the same time, there are different divisions of far right and far left in United States. Other than that, COVID-19 and the way Trump administration has handled or tackled or faced this challenge has been a talk of the town back in the United States, internationally as well, and we'll be discussing about that. Also, Trump foreign policy of United States is going to be the external and I think very important aspect of this election back in the United States and also for the world. Specifically for South Asia, since we talk about Pakistan-US relations, United States long involvement in Afghanistan, for that matter, a 19-year-long war in Afghanistan. Though it has moved on a little, there are some bright prospects, but still the situation is unclear in Afghanistan. So a future would be tricky, since the Taliban and US have they had a deal, but still there are a lot of things that the US has to work on, the Taliban have to work on. While this is going on, in the past, President Trump talked about Kashmir, and he also offered mediation in Kashmir. That is a number one foreign policy issue for Pakistan at the moment. Aggression from the Indian side is another thing. And keeping in mind that India is backed by United States in the region, and since the strategic shift has taken place in the region, many people see India posing a threat to the Chinese. Chinese influence at the same time is nothing new. So all these things will be discussed in today's show. The way Trump administration is going to address it in these times, in next few weeks, and the way the opposition party, the Democrats, are going to bring up the issue of foreign policy as well as the domestic politics, keeping also in mind that Trump administration has been playing the Russia card and the China card as well. We are joined by our special guest in the studios, Ambassador Naghmana Hashmi, the renowned senior diplomat, Pakistani diplomat, and Pakistan's former ambassador to China. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Hashmi. We are also joined by Lieutenant General retired Amjad Shoaib on phone call, and we are also joined by Mr. Imran Jan, renowned columnist based in the United States. I welcome both General Shoaib and Mr. Imran Jan. I'll start with Ambassador Hashmi. This election, as I said, is very important for not just for United States, but for the world as well. President Trump himself has a very different personality, different from Obama or his predecessors. How important is this election, first of all, for US, and internally the divisions that we see, the rift that we see, how do you evaluate that?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. Before we sort of plunge in this discussion, there's one point that I would like to make. As you're very well aware, Pakistan has had a very good cooperative relationship with the US. US is the sole superpower that is in the world today. We've had our ups and downs and our high points and low points in our relationships. A lot of people say that it is a transactional relationship. When they need us, they come to us. When they don't need us, they leave us. But irrespective of all that debate, it is a superpower, and Pakistan has to interact with it, and it has to ensure that it secures its core national interests with whichever government comes into power. So whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, who is elected into office, of course, is the choice of the American people, which we all have to respect. Our focus here should be to ensure that we have a working relationship with both of them, so we can take care of our core national interest, strategic, political, economic, commercial, and others.
Right.
So, after saying that, we can now
certainly. We're going to discuss about this national interest because this is very important. We have been working with US since 1947, and of course, the war in Afghanistan for that matter. But starting with also the internal politics, I would put this question to Mr. Imran Jan. Mr. Jan, the way local and domestic politics has played a big role in American politics, Black Lives Matter for that matter, the way people have been questioning Trump's approach toward Black Lives Matter, these schisms and divisions in the domestic politics, how do you see that?
So, starting this year, even the year before, domestic issues in the United States have been the dominant issues driving this election, actually. Because remember, there is not a country in the world that Trump has invaded. Foreign policy is not going to play a major role in deciding this presidential election. As you mentioned, Black Lives Matter and other such domestic issues, America being divided more with Trump in charge. So these issues are going to be deciding the election. Remember, we in Pakistan talk about Afghanistan and ending America's longest war in Afghanistan. Right. It's on nobody's mind in this country, in the United States. Nobody thinks about Afghanistan anymore. Nobody talks about it, almost nobody. The media doesn't, I mean, the leading mainstream media like CNN, Fox News.
But Imran, if nobody talks about, my question is, or people think in Pakistan, if nobody talks about Afghanistan in domestic politics, and you might be right, then why Trump wants to pull out the American troops from Afghanistan, for Iraq for that matter, Syria for that matter, that is having some impression on the domestic politics. Don't you see that way?
So last year, this was before the height of the coronavirus, and this was before Trump's impeachment. Last year, when there was talk about Russian meddling in the 2016 election, Trump had been trying to score some foreign policy on foreign policy fronts. The killing of Soleimani, the killing of al-Baghdadi, ISIS leader, and General Soleimani of Iran, and also the making of the peace deal with the Taliban, trying to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan. He was trying his best to prove his foreign policy credentials, which again, people have lost taste of it. He tried to do all that. He tried to end America's longest war, but like I said, it may not give him much value. It may not give, the voters don't think about that right now. Everyone's thinking about the coronavirus and the COVID-19 and how Trump has handled that, because the media has made so much noise about that. If we really have to rationally decide, let's say as Americans, who should we elect, Trump is a major threat to even humanity's survival. He doesn't believe in climate change, for example. He thinks that's a hoax. So Biden at least says, yeah, that's a threat. We need to do something about that. So if rationality was driving this election, we would be talking about climate change right now. That issue should have been driving the election in this country. It is not, unfortunately. So this election is being decided by the virus right now, and Afghanistan election and foreign policy issues are not going to be important here.
Right. We are joined by Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib. General Shoaib, welcome to the show. Talking about these two aspects, the internal politics, Indian politics as they call it, and the American foreign policy. But starting with the internal politics first, the Black Lives Matter is a big issue in the United States. What is going to be the impact of such kind of issues on the domestic politics and primarily on the Republican nominee, President Trump?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This division on, I must say, it's a very, very important issue as far as the black people are concerned. And I have a feeling that till such time we have a white man fighting the election, standing for presidential slot, the black people perhaps will have reservations and they will not vote for him. Or perhaps they would like to vote for a person, maybe a white man, but at the same time having more a sort of better attitude or better approach towards the black people. And maybe Biden could be a better choice as far as that aspect is concerned. At the same time, I would say the economic factor perhaps, and the COVID factor, these are the two main factors which are going to be debated. And foreign policy, of course, this man has destroyed because he has taken out America out of all those most of the international agreements which the United States had signed at that time. And that trouble is going to be there. But then, as far as the election is concerned, the voting results is going to be affected by these factors. So I would say for Pakistan, we are definitely going to be more concerned for Afghanistan because there is a...
Right, but General Shoaib, sorry to interrupt you. I asked the same question to Mr. Imran, that while you said that these wars and don't you think that pulling the troops out of Afghanistan and Syria would help Trump back in the United States? Because he promised that he would pull out troops from Afghanistan and Syria, and he fulfilled his promises. So this is one of the, I would say, strong points for Trump.
Actually, Trump is going to capitalize on these things also because he is going to claim that these are the promises that I made during my campaign in my previous election, and look, I have fulfilled all these promises. So naturally, he is going to talk about it more than anybody else. But all said and done, the deciding factor will still be the economy and COVID. People are not going to pay much attention to his promises because the things have changed in a drastic manner. The country is facing such a terrible situation, and perhaps not like United States. It is unlike United States. It is like perhaps in a third world country. Even they have fared better as far as fighting against COVID is concerned, and US is in trouble. But I'm talking from Pakistan's point of view. The problem is the pulling out these troops from Afghanistan is a priority for the United States at this time only because Trump had made a promise. But on the other hand, Pentagon has a different point of view. They have a feeling that the United States could not come out of Afghanistan as a victorious state only because Pakistan perhaps was helping the Taliban. So that narrative has not been shelved. Pentagon still is carrying that impression, and I have a feeling that once the troops have gone and the things become normal and we have another gentleman sitting there in the presidential house, the palace, maybe Trump or anybody else, ultimately this issue is going to come up where they are going to blame Pakistan that United States, this hurried type of withdrawal from Afghanistan just to fulfill and then not to have that victory which they wanted to have. Without that victory, this perhaps is going to be, the burden is going to be put on Pakistan's shoulders. And they are going to say that it was because of Pakistan. So we are going to ultimately face that kind of situation where we will again be perhaps explaining our position to the world that we were not the concerned. We didn't have our support for the Afghan Taliban. Unfortunately, this is a sort of impression which the world is carrying, and there is an impression which Pentagon is trying to put across as an excuse for their own failure, for the failure of their own policies. So naturally, for the time being, it is not being talked about, but ultimately, this is going to be talked about by the people, and Pakistan will have to face this situation ultimately.
Right. General Shoaib, please stay with us on phone call. Ambassador Hashmi, this point is very interesting, that General Shoaib is skeptic about the American approach towards Afghanistan, keeping also in mind that the American military establishment wasn't happy with the troops withdrawal. General James Mattis, for that matter, from Syria and Afghanistan. As you talked about the Pakistan-US relations, how do you see the future of South Asia and Pakistan-US relations, how they're going to unfold in the future?
To begin with, I would like to say that to a certain extent I agree with General Shoaib that it was an election promise by Trump that he would withdraw, but there is division within the American establishment because they wanted a phased withdrawal, because they are of the opinion that if you do a hurried withdrawal, and we were also of the opinion that a rushed withdrawal may lead us back to the same situation that we faced when the Americans just packed their bags up and left. So it has to be a phased withdrawal, setting up the systems and building up the capacity of the Afghan government to control their own territory, so that the same situation doesn't occur as it occurred in the 90s. And it will be an important consideration, and that is where I beg to disagree a little bit with Mr. Imran in the US, that yes, the internal politics will matter, will have a big say in the outcome of the elections, because the American politics is in a state of flux like it has never been before. Its economy, its society itself is in a state of flux. But you also have to understand that this is the kind of flux which is not only happening in the US. You see it across Europe. The rise of the far right, the rise of the far left, the popularistic approaches. There is this whole system of otherization, this whole philosophy of otherization, of white supremacy that is sweeping across the globe. And it has also gripped the Americans. So it is not only the blacks, but the Hispanics, the Latinos, the Asians, everybody is feeling the heat. But at the same time, I would disagree with Mr. Imran that foreign policy issues will not play any role. Because if foreign policy issues were not to play a big role in the American politics, then there would be no need for Mr. Trump to create the kind of a demon dragon that he is creating out of China. It is this fear of China that plays out in the economy, in technology, and at the societal level as well. And if you look at that rivalry, then you see it play out in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and in the Indo-Pacific.
Very interesting. And I'll put this question to General Shoaib. You talked about Trump administration, but looking at the history of Pakistan-US relations, recent history, I would say, Pakistan's experience with the Democrats recently, with the Obama administration, wasn't very pleasant, I would say. President Obama didn't visit Pakistan in his 2 terms. Comparatively, if we look at Trump administration and Pakistan's relations with the Republicans, that has been interesting. At least things have been moving on. How do you see the future if Biden comes in as a Democrat? Do you think that the Obama administration thing would come back in US and in Pakistan-US relations? General Shoaib, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
I
right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think the change in White House doesn't really matter. As far as Pakistan is concerned, it will always be seen through the lens of establishment, military establishment, because we have a relationship which is primarily connected with the security issues and Afghanistan, etc. So we do not have at this time a political role of the nature that perhaps can draw us to closer to United States from any angle. We are very close to China, and US has identified China as their main adversary. Similarly, India is our main adversary, and they are having a strategic partnership with India. So when you are absolutely sitting in a different camp, in an opposing camp, we should not expect that there is going to be any radical change, whether we have Biden sitting there or we have anybody else sitting there. So that is going to be there. We, as far as the United States is concerned, it will be a challenge for us to maintain some kind of good relationship with US, but that will be in our interest to do that. And ultimately, it will be a sort of firefighting that wherever, when we have a friction with the United States, you keep on perhaps using some diplomatic measures in a way that you remove those misunderstandings and you keep having some kind of smooth sailing with them. But it won't be a kind of partnership that we really used to have at some time. That is not going to be there. On the other hand, I would say Chinese role is expanding. And the Americans at this moment, you see a lot of, as Ambassador was mentioning, that China is being targeted for everything, with everything, technology and everything. But the basic problem with China arose on COVID-19 because of mishandling. I think Trump could not handle it properly, and now he's trying to put the blame on Chinese that they didn't inform us properly, they didn't inform us in time, and now they must be punished because they have played a dirty role in as far as COVID case is concerned. So he is using all sorts of means, but then ultimately he's going to tell his own people that it was China which played a dirty role for COVID-19, and ultimately US had to face this situation. And I have punished them properly because we have faced these so many casualties in the United States, and China was required to be punished, so I've done it. So he will put it as his achievement that he has really punished China in a big way and try to capitalize on that and get votes. But as said, in my opinion, basic problem was COVID-19, from where the situation took a turn for the worse, and U.S. started taking certain actions against China. And at the same time, see, when we are standing with China, it is in our advantage, and naturally our foreign policy direction that we have taken. So I would say that our relations with China, although will keep on strengthening, but at the same time it will remain a challenge for us to maintain normal kind of relationship with the U.S. because that interest which they are seeing in Afghanistan with the completion of CPAC, that interest is going to be diluted. Their main focus will be on CPAC, which is a bigger threat, which perhaps is a sort of challenge for the U.S. They wanted to confine China within South China Sea and trying to control the Malacca Strait, which they have lost because of the CPAC. That containment of China is no more effective. So that way, I think their focus will remain on CPAC, and ultimately that focus on Afghanistan perhaps will diminish, and Pakistan will have those challenges to maintain a sort of understanding with the U.S., a sort of level of relationship which can neutralize some of those negative effects which it can create, some of those nuisance values which United States can play against you. So these are the issues that you are going to face in that situation.
General Shoaib, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. We're going to take a break, and after the break, we're going to discuss the internal politics with our special guest in the studios, Mr. Nagmana Hashmi, and with Mr. Imran Jan about the domestic politics in the United States. After this break, stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the elections in the United States and the way things are hyped in the American public, the way people are discussing about it, the world is discussing about it. These elections are important, as I said earlier, not just for the United States, but for the world. Strategic shifts are taking place in Middle East, in South Asia for that matter, and the way US has handled COVID-19, Trump administration has handled COVID-19, that is also going to play a major role back in the domestic politics in the United States. Mr. Imran, COVID-19 was a big blow to many countries, to the globe I would say. Globally it was a big challenge for all the countries. Trump administration's performance in the COVID times, joblessness, healthcare system for that matter, the way it exposed American administration, Trump administration, what is going to be the impact of these things on these elections?
I actually wrote about this issue a little while ago. Right now, people are filing for unemployment benefits by the millions. Trump is sending free money checks to people. The people got about 1,000 families got like $3,000-4,000 for just, it's some money they don't have to return. Businesses have been applying for loans that they may or may not return. Now, he's doing this because this is the election year, and he's even writing his name on those checks. When you receive those checks, it's signed by, it's his signature on them. Once the election is over, that's when people are going to start feeling the heat, because even if Trump wins, he will not have the need anymore to convince people to vote for him again, because he's already done with the election, and he's not a president who would care about having a legacy after his second term. And if Biden comes in, he's not going to continue because this is not sustainable in the long run anyway, to keep giving free money to people. I see people here who can go back to job, but they're not going back to job. And the reason is because the money they get for being unemployed is more than the paycheck they would be getting, let's say, if they were to go to that job. So that's one aspect. It's going to get really ugly. It's going to get really bad come November and December, especially after the election. I do want to clarify one thing. Of course, foreign policy is a major driver of any country, and of course the United States too. Yes, China is there, the Russians are always there. Trump was even impeached because of a foreign affair he had with the Ukrainian president, Zelensky. But
Right.
if you look back at Bush's election, second election, it was all about terrorism and Al-Qaeda. Obama's election, same thing. Second election,
Right.
same thing. But Trump election right now is more about domestic issues. COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, the economy, the jobs. Yes, there are other external issues like China. He always likes to bash China. Pakistan, Afghanistan is not really on the radar. It's not on the American people's minds right now. And I want to give an opinion, and it really alarms me. It is alarming because I have a feeling that if peace deal is not fully, the peace deal that the United States signed with the Taliban, if it's not fully executed before November 3, the election day, it will never be executed for. It will not be executed in a long time after that.
Right.
And here's the reason why. If Trump is
okay.
elected,
Mr.
he will not
Imran,
feel the need to do that.
sorry to
anymore.
cut you. We have live breaking. After that, we'll be back to our show. Welcome back. We are discussing U.S. elections. Ambassador Hashmi, how important is the impact of China, let's say, on the psyche of the Trump administration, on Americans? Because the way they have been demonizing China, that has been unprecedented, I would say. Of course, because of the challenges that China is posing to U.S. in terms of economy. But how do you see the situation?
Well, actually, demonizing of China has been going on for a while. Different US administrations have done it, but none as blatantly as the Trump administration. And there, especially in the recent 8-9 months, especially after the pandemic, because what people don't realize is that this controversy over pandemic is not just about that China failed to inform the world in time, which of course is debatable, but it's much deeper. Because for the last 70 years, the West, and particularly the US, has been leading the charge against the system of governance, against the system of economy, against their political system. And suddenly comes the pandemic, which has seen the political systems, the governance systems, the deliverability systems, and the economies of the world, and especially of the developed world, come to their knees. And there you have the example of China that has not only pandemic has not only validated the political system of China, that it can care for the people and has the confidence of the Chinese people, because if they did not have, if the government did not have the confidence of the Chinese people, they would not follow. As simple as that. This is not the China of the 60s and the 70s.
Right.
It's a very different China. If you live there and if you watch there, you see it's full of young people, full of dreams, full of pride on being Chinese, and because the consecutive Chinese governments have made sure that the standards of living has increased. They have taken 800 million people out of poverty in the shortest possible time, which has never happened in human history. So right now, it is not just about China delaying or China exporting the pandemic. It is about the fight and the justification of the two political systems, the governance systems, and also the economic philosophies and systems. Because right in the beginning of the pandemic, 1 month into pandemic, and President Xi himself came out on national television and he told the people, he said the basic fundamentals of the Chinese economy are strong enough and we will withstand this. And it did, because in the second quarter you see China has rebounded. And another thing, where again the industrial system and the production systems of the West have also collapsed, whereas the Chinese production houses were very able to readjust themselves and reorient themselves towards newer ways of production for what was required in the world. Therefore, it's a much deeper political debate. It is whether socialism with Chinese characteristics and the one-party system that they have has delivered for their people better than what the Western system has developed for their people. So it's a much deeper fight. So it's a much deeper demonization.
Very interesting. And before the break, we also talked about the foreign policy of these two systems. Trump's relations with EU and the way Chinese have been reaching out to the European Union and the European Union's connection with the Chinese. How do you see the foreign policy of China and US and the way China has been asserting more influence on different regions?
Look, all big powers, or for that matter on regional level, all other second tier powers and third tier powers, they have their own ways of influencing. Now, for the last 70, 80 years, you have seen US trying to extend its influence to various parts of the world, to the various regions. But its strategy is more of interference, of invading, of proxy wars and everything else. Whereas if you look at China, China has never been an expansionist state. They have never gone outside their borders in history, in 5,000 years of their history. They have defended their own land, but they have never gone out. So what the Chinese believe is developing, but also developing its neighbors with you, because it is the Chinese philosophy that if your neighbor is poorer than you are, then that will create discontent on the borders, and that discontent will then reflect into your own country. Therefore, what China has done is going through frameworks of cooperation and taking its partners towards economic development, what they call socio-economic development for peace and security in the new era, which means working for the common destiny of mankind, for the prosperity of mankind, which the Americans see as China trying to buy smaller countries and trying to use the extra cash that they have and trying to use their economic powerhouse that it has become to buy countries. Now this is debatable, because you can turn around and say that all the financial institutions that were created 70 years ago were also like the World Bank.
So very interesting. So do you think that US under Trump administration or even under Obama administration has been ceding space to the Chinese influence in EU for that matter, or in the Europe?
In EU there is a lot of Chinese influence in the EU. They have a lot of convergence of views, even on international issues that concern our region. For example, take the issue of Iran sanctions. The Chinese and the majority of the EU countries see eye to eye about Iran sanctions, and they do not align their views with the US, and that is why you saw 13 countries vote against the United States in the Security Council.
Yes.
And that is why the JSPOE, when the Americans opted out of it, sort of encouraged a lot of criticism from the Europeans. The Europeans were not happy, and they did not follow the US lead. And similarly, while the US was involved in its wars and in the Middle East and in North Africa and everywhere else, you saw China going to Africa, for example, and going to Latin America with their economic development, with their infrastructure projects. And they have also a lot of ingress in the Eastern European countries. And the most important thing which a lot of people fail to see is the coming together of the Russians and the Chinese.
Right.
And it is this entire configuration that is, of course,
This is very interesting.
threatening to the
Very interesting.
Americans.
Do you think that many people are of this view? There's this perception that U.S. is challenged strategically by the Russians, as in case of Syria, and in terms of economy by China. So these are two multi-pronged, I would say, challenges to U.S. Do you see it that way?
They see it that way.
Yes, right.
And because their perception of China has never been peaceful. Their perception of China is an evil dragon raising its head that is a direct threat to the Americans. And that is why recently you must have read news and all about the Americans and the Australians and the New Zealanders and Japan trying to make this new NATO and trying to encircle them. In fact, their cozying up with India is also not because they love India more than they love any other country. It is because they think that it's a counterweight to the Chinese. And it's my totally personal view, it's not the government view, but I strongly feel that the recent skirmish that we saw in
Galwan.
or also maybe encouraged by some of the powers to see how China would respond. And I also think it was also to see China's resilience after Kuwait. And I think China gave a very, very strong response. And militarily also, if you look at China, it is not the China of the 60s. With the reorganization of their military setup and modernization of their army on modern lines, they were able to move an entire division within 12 hours in a very, very difficult area.
And certainly, rightly said, and this was an embarrassing episode for India and its package this time.
I think it is the first time that the West and the Indians are realizing that the Chinese are not only politically strong, but they are now also financially and militarily strong to defend their interests. And they will not let anybody cross their red lines. And the Chinese have very clearly said that too, that we will not go out seeking war. We want peace within our country because we want to develop. We want to get out of absolute poverty by the end of this year. And then, of course, they want to gain their rightful place in history and move on. So they're not looking for war. But if one is imposed on them, they will fight tooth and nail.
So let's see. And I hope things go smoothly. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador Hashmi. Pleasure having you on the show. Thank you.
Pleasure being with you.
Thank you. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.